Hi everyone and welcome back to a new video comparison by Mio Lessons. This time I'll be talking about two gorgeous 85mm portrait lenses, the Sony G Master and the Zeiss Batis. The Sony 85mm is part of a new family of professional lenses called G Master. The company has been insisting a lot on the superior resolution and the perfect bokeh of these lenses, both achieved thanks to a complex design that includes a new extreme spherical element and, in the case of the 85mm, an 11-blade iris mechanism. The Zeiss 85mm is part of the Batis family, which is one of the two lens lineups that Zeiss is producing exclusively for the Sony FE system, the other one being the Luxia series. It is also the first portrait lens designed for the FE system and was released in 2015. A lot of Sony users are wondering if the Sony G Master lens is worth the extra money in comparison to the Zeiss Batis. In this video I will show you different examples to see where the relevant differences really lie. The Sony G Master is the bigger lens of the two and is also heavier. It is dust and moisture resistant but not completely weather sealed. One thing I really appreciate about the Sony lens is the aperture ring. It is smooth, precise and really nice to use. It moves in 1/3 steps and it can also be declicked for video work. I honestly wish more lenses had such a ring, including the Batis lenses. Another nice thing about the Sony lens is the autofocus manual focus switch and the focus hold button. The latter in particular can be very handy. The Zeiss Batis is weather resistant. It lacks buttons, switches and an aperture ring, but it has an OLED screen on top. You can use it to check your focus distance and depth of field. The data is a bit difficult to see in daylight, but it is definitely useful in low light. That being said, I find the OLED screen more useful with wide-angle lenses such as the 25mm or the 18mm for astrophotography, for example. Both lenses have a focus-by-wire type focus ring covered with rubber. I find the one on the Sony G Master lens to be more precise, especially when changing the focus point in video mode. It is easier to make precise adjustments or make a smooth and slow transition. With the Batis lens I have to turn the focus ring more to achieve the same result. We can also notice that the Batis lens has more breathing in comparison to the Sony lens. The Sony G Master lens has a 1.4 aperture versus the 1.8 opening of the Batis lens. So let's see first how the two lenses perform wide open. The Batis lens is sharper at f1.8 and believe me when I say that I ran this test multiple times to be absolutely sure. With both lenses topped down to f2, the Batis still has a little bit more contrast. At f2.8, the results are almost identical. From f4, the Sony lens starts to appear slightly sharper, but the difference is really hard to detect. The results remain constant up to f16. Now let's analyze the bokeh, because let's face it, that's the aspect we care about the most, right? The Sony lens has an 11 blades iris mechanism versus the 9 blades of the Batis 85. At the fastest apertures, the Batis lens produces a more noticeable swirly effect. We can also see cat's eye shapes near the edges of the image. The Sony G Master, on the other hand, gives you a more precise result. The autofocus circles are more rounded even at the edges and the background is more uniform. At f2 you will notice the same differences, while at f2.8 the background in the Batis image becomes more uniform. However, the Sony lens retains more rounded circles, while on the Batis they start to become more hexagonal. One curiosity about these two lenses: despite both being 85mm, they actually have a slightly different field of view. As you can see in this example right here, the Batis lens has a narrower angle of view. It seems slightly longer than the Sony lens. If I disable the lens profile correction in Lightroom, they look more similar, but the Zeiss is still a little bit longer. Now let's see a third example with a full body shot. This is an example I really like because it tells us how the lenses perform with longer focus distances, not just concerning sharpness, but also how they separate the subject from the background. Here we can see that the fastest aperture, or f1.4, gives a small advantage to the Sony lens when it comes to shallow depth of field. Concerning sharpness, once again the Zeiss lens has a tiny advantage when the two lenses are set wide open. From f2, it is actually the Sony G Master that seems to be a little bit sharper, but it's not easy to detect the difference. When focusing at infinity at f4, 5.6 or f8, both lenses give identical results. Both lenses can focus as close as 80 cm. The Zeiss lens suffers more from vignetting wide open, but in both cases fall-off can easily be fixed once the lens profile is applied in Lightroom or a similar software. Wide open, the Sony lens suffers more from longitudinal chromatic aberration, and you will need to fix it in post with the RAW file. The lens performs much better from f2.8. Chromatic aberration on the Batis lens is much more contained at f1.8. Finally, when it comes to flare, the Sony lens can produce a streaky effect in direct sunlight, while the Batis 85mm produces more ghost flares. Concerning the autofocus, both lenses focus fast with single IF or when using the IIF mode of Sony cameras. In continuous autofocus, both lenses give similar results for stills on the A7R Mark II. Interestingly, the Batis lens performed better for video on the A7R Mark II and A6300. Another difference between these two lenses is image stabilization. The Sony G Master lens doesn't have any, while the Batis has optical stabilization, which makes the Zeiss lens more interesting for users that have a first generation A7 camera or a Sony A6000 or A6300. With the Sony lens mounted on the A7R Mark II, we can take advantage of the 5-axis in-body stabilization and manage sharp shots down to 1/10 of a second. With the Batis lens on the A7R Mark II, the result was the same, so the optical stabilization didn't bring a substantial advantage. On the non-stabilized A6300, the sharpest shot I got was 1/10 of a second once again. The results are similar for video as well. Approximately $600 separate these two lenses. Concerning sharpness, we saw that there isn't a huge difference, and actually the Zeiss Batis holds its ground really well. Yes, the Sony 85mm is slightly faster, but remember that between f1.4 and f1.8 there is not even one stop of difference. Wide open, the Batis 85mm is actually sharper, while from f2.8 the results remain similar. Granted, a f1.4 lens is more difficult to design and the G Master gives great result wide open. Plus you can separate your subject from the background better, especially at longer focus distances. The most relevant difference is the bokeh rendering. The Sony lens gives you a more uniform result and has almost perfectly rounded bokeh circles. The Zeiss Batis has a different character and might please those who are looking for a little bit of swirly effect. The Sony lens is easier to use thanks to its buttons and switches, and I really like having an aperture ring. Its focus ring is more precise to use in video mode. However, the Batis 85mm has optical stabilization, and that is not something to underestimate, especially if the camera you intend to use with the lens doesn't have in-body stabilization. Usually there is a bigger difference between a f1.4 and f1.8 portrait lens when it comes to optical quality and price. In DSLR territory, the 1.8 version is the affordable option. But here things are a bit different, because the Zeiss Batis 85mm is not cheap. It costs more than $1,000 and delivers top-class results. It's not just your cheap alternative portrait lens. Personally, I think that the Batis 85mm is the better bang for the buck. The Sony G Master lens is perhaps the ultimate portrait lens for a professional photographer. Sharpness and separation of the subject from the background are impressive. The bokeh is almost perfect. But I would buy it only if I was out there shooting portraits for my clients every single day. For everything else, I think that the Batis lens is more than enough. So, as usual, thanks you for watching. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to leave a comment below this video. Please subscribe, like the video, and see you soon. Bye bye!